If you retrieve your document, the Robert Kennedy on the death of Martin Luther King speech, and we're going to be annotating, and this is critical reading and critical thinking. So follow along. You can add comments on the Word app, or I guess the Word program on your computer, by going to review. So you're at home, you go to review, new comment. So you highlight the space where you want to add a comment and it'll do it. Okay. I don't need a new one. So I'm just gonna, oops. I don't know how to delete it. Good luck. All right. So here he begins with a salutation. All right. So Kennedy, again, remember the rhetorical triangle. King just died and he's sharing those news. All right. So he starts with a salutation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk to you just for a minute or so this evening. So right off the bat, the audience knows this is an irregular speech. Okay. Because usually they don't start that way. And there's a pause. And when you saw it in the video, it's more like he's trying to gather his thoughts, or it's more like he's finding words or fighting back tears. I have some very sad news for all of you. And I think sad news for all our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. Right? So he's just trying to figure out how to say this. And if you notice a repetition here, excuse me, imitates someone who is carefully trying to find the words to share some really bad news. Okay. So here's our first note. All right. The repetition. So I went ahead and highlighted the repetition here. The repetition is also called an anaphora, serves as an attention getter for the audience. And it also sets this solemn tone. All right. And what that does is it starts to get the attention of the audience by saying, hey, something's going on. It's not a hook. A hook is more like, I got you hooked. I'm going to, tell you what I want. But in this case, it is an attention getter. All right. All of a sudden, everybody stops and they're listening. All right. And then he begins with a very solemn tone. And the tone is established through these short little sentences. Very paused. Okay. Very serious. And then all at once, he delivers the message. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Even though it's one, fast phrase, he provides all the information that the audience needs to know so that he's not interrupted with the details of the tragedy. So here you have Martin Luther King, what happened? He was shot. Even though it sounds terrible, if he had said assassinated, people would be wondering, okay, was he stabbed? Because King had already been stabbed once. There was an attempted murder on him before. And now he gives this crucial information, was killed. He could have said he was shot, but now death is confirmed. Was killed. When? Tonight. Where? Memphis, Tennessee. So this is very effective in delivering the news all at once, all in one blow. Okay. And it creates a shock in the audience. And I'm not sure, it's a natural shock. Okay. He's not doing it on purpose to play with their feelings or anything, but he is trying to deliver a message here. Okay. So this, it is pathos, evokes grief from the audience. Also, his syntax, the fact that he just releases the whole information in one long phrase, creates a shocking effect. Okay, like as in it may be too much to take in all at once. And then the previous repetition that I was talking about, some very sad news, some very sad news, some very sad news for all of you, for all of you, for all of our citizens, right? That repetition, that hesitation builds suspense, okay, and anticipation from the audience. Yeah, I'm coming back around. Thank you. There's the one that I skipped, all right? The repetition, that hesitation builds suspense and anticipation.
Wait, Miss, you put your cursor to exactly where that part goes to.
Hey, do what I'm telling. It's this one right here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's all this. And we're just logging in. We are annotating the Martin Luther King speech. I do apologize if it's a little messy, but annotating is always messy. Okay. So that's in the first paragraph. Evokes pathos, uses repetition, and the repetition of a phrase is called an anaphora. Okay. Now, are we ready for the next paragraph? Okay. Okay, let's move on. I'm just gonna catch somebody up here. And I'm repeating the previous ones for Alexa. Okay, here we go. The next paragraph, it says Martin Luther King dedicated. So now the words that I've highlighted, these are the diction. And diction is the careful choice of words an author makes. Now, you can't just say, oh, his diction is very important and creates an effect. Yes, it does. But what kind of effect does it create? Okay, so notice that he says dedicated, like his whole life is devoted to this. All right, Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. And dedication shows a great effort from King. So notice that he didn't say Martin Luther King was all about life and love, right? Because King was a preacher, okay, and he dedicated his life to God and to that, but also to the civil rights movement. And so here he dedicated his life, so that shows a whole lot of effort from him. Love and to justice between fellow human beings. So now I'm looking at this right here. Sorry, this one. His diction unifies the people as opposed to having said black or white people. All right, so here he says fellow human beings. Notice that he doesn't say that he dedicated his life to the civil rights movement. He didn't dedicate his life to just African Americans. He dedicated his life to love and justice between human beings. So by saying human beings rather than black or white, he's unifying the audience just with his words. Okay. And then he adds, he died in the cause, in other words, because of this effort, in the cause of that effort. Then he says, in this difficult day, in this difficult time. So again, repetition, difficult day, difficult time. So notice his ideas are progressing. Day, he moves on to time. It's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this sentence. There's parallel structure. Is first allowing the reader to follow his progression of ideas. That's simple structure. Okay, they are easily following his thoughts. There's no confusion. Right, he moves from the today to the time. So the parallel structure and the anaphora now are going to create a rhythm and also an anticipation in this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States. Now we're looking for an answer there. We're looking for, okay, what about it? And he tells us, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of nation we are. And the use of repetition highlights how difficult today is really. And then notice the alliteration. I've underlined those. Well, what we want. That is also happening to emphasize and to help the progression of ideas. It is creating a rhythm that helps us follow his thoughts easily. All right. Writers also do that because sometimes they memorize speeches and they have to remember it, and putting it in some kind of rhythm helps them remember it better. Okay, so he does that for two reasons: for his own reason and also for the audience to follow, because naturally things that have a rhythm are easier to remember and they're easier to follow. They stick, they become more memorable. Finally, he's using ethos to remind. Did I skip? Yeah. He's using ethos to remind the audience of King's work. So I'm going to go back to this note right here. He's using King in this paragraph to remind them of his work, as well as pathos to evoke a feeling of patriotism as to what kind of nation we are. In other words, you're part of this nation. How are we as a nation? So he's using ethos and pathos in this whole paragraph as well. Any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Amber. Are we okay? Do we move on? Am I going too fast?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. So in the next section, for those of you who are Black, so notice here the very specific audience. All right, so now he's addressing them individually. Considering the evidence evidently is, okay, so this is a little awkward construction. And even though evidence is and evidently are from the same Latin root, evidence is the proof, but evidently is obviously. Okay, so you can tell that this is a very spontaneous speech. All right, he could have said obviously, but he said evidently, right? Because there's proof. There's proof that it was a white person. So considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, right? So he can't avoid the fact that they were white people. And I can see this hesitation here, that there's certain fear from him, right? Because he's white and he's delivering some very difficult news. And so now speaking to his audience, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. And notice the words there again, diction. And desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country in greater polarization. I'm going to stop right here and talk about hatred. Okay. So his use of diction helps create a contrast. And that contrast is going to highlight those words, because later he's going to use the opposite words or very, contrasting words like compassion and love instead of bitterness and hatred or revenge, right? So he didn't ask for forgiveness, right? Notice he's not asking for forgiveness. He's not asking anybody to forgive anybody. He just says compassion, okay, and love. Then he moves on to polarization. And polarization is one of those interesting ones because he says we can move that direction, right? Be filled with bitterness and hatred in greater polarization. And if you look at the definition of polarization, it means division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs. So in other words, segregation. And not just divided by, notice it says contrasting groups, right? So definitely he says black people among blacks and white among whites filled with hatred towards one another. He's talking about segregation. Okay. And so with this word, he says, is that what you want? You want to be segregated? Again, talking to them directly about their current state as a nation. They are segregated. Remember? This is what they're fighting. Black people amongst blacks, whites among whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort. Notice how he makes this he uses this conjunction at the beginning of the sentence. He does not. He puts a period there, and this is one of those sentences that he's drawing attention by using incorrect grammar. Okay, because this is a call to action. Okay, so syntax. Notice the use of the or at the beginning of the sentence. This is style. This is his style. He is drawing to draw attention to the other obvious choice. Okay. Make an effort. Notice he's not saying forgive, forget. No, he's saying make an effort. That's all I'm asking. And this is the beginning of his call to action. This is what he wants the audience to do. Okay, and then he reminds them, as Martin Luther King did. King made an effort. So further saying, this is, your leader. Remember, he's talking to a Black audience, as Martin Luther King did. So he brings in ethos. I should add that there. And the way to correctly say this is establishes credibility by saying King I added too much. Okay, what did I do here? There we go. All right. And to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed. So hear this imagery. Listen to this imagery right here. Okay. And it's a very cringe type of image. All right. The stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land. This is a reference back to the shot. King was shot and killed. Okay. So if you can imagine the stain when something like someone gets shot, there is just like, it's like it sprays all over the wall or sprays all over the floor or rolls the blood, warm blood just rolls down drips down to the floor, with it's fluent that has spread across our land. So now he gives him this like very physical image of a very symbolic moment, right? This is what's happened. There's blood all over the land. So it creates a visually cringe-worthy image of what has happened to the audience, or what has happened to get the audience to physically see the degree of violence. Yeah, sure, there was this. But he's saying, replace that, okay? Take that off with an effort to understand compassion and love. So again, comes back to this with an effort, right? So his message is make an effort. That's all he's asking for, to make an effort. Okay, any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so here's that note. Okay. And the next paragraph, continuing with the same audience, for those of you who are Black, okay, and are tempted. So first things first, he's talking to a predominantly Black audience. There are some white members in the audience, obviously, but a Black audience and also a Christian audience, okay? So he says, you and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people. Okay, so here he highlights this word tempted. He doesn't say like over here, you can be filled. He says you are tempted. And the word tempted, again, his strategy is diction here, brings a negative connotation. It's a negative feeling. as in to give into temptation, which may be a sin in their religion. And by just bringing those things in, he's using pathos. He's tugging at their faith. You wouldn't do something against your faith, would you? Okay. So this is what he's saying. You're giving into don't give into temptation, because temptation is a sin, without even having to say that. Okay. So the word tempted brings a negative connotation, as in giving into temptation, which may be a sin. Then continues with the diction, to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act. Then he says, against all white people. And he includes there, he's white, remember? So I think this paragraph comes in as a protective measure for him and, you know, the rest of the white people that are in the audience and behind him. I would say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. Okay, so here he's reminding the audience and also unifying the audience, establishing ethos, establishing credibility, so that the Black audience can relate to him and see him as an equally hurt and grieving man, and not just a white man. And that goes for him, and you know, because he's also their leader, right? He's running for president, and he needs their vote as well on their side, because he has the same kind of feeling. So he unifies the audience. Their grief unifies them. We're the same, he's saying, which may also be pathos. Okay. Questions so far?
Miss, the one that you just sent. Oh wait, never mind. They're together. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There go. I just added it here. Okay. Can we move on? Everybody keeping up?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. So in the next section, notice how short this paragraph is. It is a one sentence paragraph. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond these rather difficult times. And this sentence might not even have that much content in it, but because his message has been, we have to make an effort. We have to make an effort. It's so he wants to highlight this because this is his message. And the repetition highlights the importance of trying to make an effort. But in a sense, this one line paragraph or one sentence paragraph is his call to action, and it is his message. Okay, so that's why he sets it apart from the rest of the paragraphs. Standalone paragraph. Emphasize this is important. Okay? And again, we have to make an effort. We have to make an effort. It's going to stick in your head. If he keeps repeating it, it's going to stick in your head. Just the same way, you know, some writers keep on repeating things like take Gregory and Shane. He kept repeating Shane, Shane, Shane. Stuck with him. But in the end, he might have not learned the lesson. He was ashamed of himself then too. Right? Shane. Make an effort, make an effort, make an effort. This is like maybe the fourth or fifth time that he says it. Okay. How are we doing on time? About 4 minutes? Right. My favorite poet was Aeschylus. And this is a Greek writer. Let's see, where are you? click on it. Okay, so what he does here is that he establishes credibility by bringing in some old wisdom. Okay, so ethos for sure. But then the actual quote that he includes is also very touching and very effective. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the heart." Right? This means that even when we're sleeping, pain doesn't forget. We don't forget pain. We suffer even when we're sleeping. We're crying even when we're sleeping, when we're in distress, right? It's continuous. The pain is continuous until, in our own despair, against our own will, even if we don't want it, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And this paragraph may seem like out of nowhere. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Right? Because it talks about his favorite poet. But then when he says this, he brings it all together. First, this is a logical argument because he's talking to a predominantly Christian audience, even though it's a racially divided America. And ironically, they call themselves Christians and they're hating each other. So sad to say. There's this argument here is that they believe that yes, God speaks to people in their own religion. God speaks to people. Okay, so that makes sense to them. It's a logical argument for this audience. Next, he uses the word God. And every time you see the word God, you know that they're using pathos because they are calling on their faith, the audience's faith, their audience's beliefs. So here, evoking on the faith to provoke a reaction. Oh yes, God does speak to people. Okay, this man is also a believer like us, so he must be on our side. So pathos to establish that he too is a believer, and that shows that he knows his audience, obviously. So let me share that with you. And then, so all three things happening in this particular paragraph. That's how good of a writer he is, right? He's working his audience. And then, of course, he's not just working his audience. His audience is already vulnerable because they're grieving. And then the next paragraph proposes solutions. Okay, this is where he's developing his speech there. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. So already building anticipation of what we don't need. So we're expecting an answer as to what do we need. Okay, so in this case, notice here, let's see the first thing, the next one. No. This word builds a contrasting effect. Not this, but that. We don't need this, we need this. So we're expecting that. So look at the words here: division, hatred, violence, lawlessness. And then they are being contrasted by love, wisdom, compassion, justice. Okay, so notice the words are opposites of each other, or at least the concepts are quite opposites. And then the repetition, what we need in the United States, what we need in the United States. Here we go. Build suspense and anticipation and allows the audience to easily follow his thoughts, follow his ideas, because it's set in parallel structure, and parallel structure organizes the idea. So it's easy to follow even for the ones that are, because they're not reading the speech, right? They're listening. So the ideas stick more if they are being repeated and they're organized in an easy way to follow them. That's important. They establish a line of reasoning and then helps the ideas progress. Okay, I think that's our time today. Am I right? Yes. All right, so we'll wrap this up tomorrow. Any questions so far? And
no, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to continue the annotation for tomorrow, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.